Have you ever poured your heart and soul into your job, achieving things nobody thought possible, only to watch someone else take the credit? I certainly have. My name is Olivia Chen, and for nearly 4 years, I was the unsung hero at Blackwell Enterprises, the sales wizard who closed impossible deals while others collected the promotions and bonuses. But everything changed the day I brought in a $2 million contract that should have made my career. Instead, my boss looked me in the eye and said the 7 words that would ultimately destroy him. "You're just not executive material, Olivia." What he didn't realize, he'd finally pushed me too far, and I was about to show him exactly what happens when you underestimate the wrong woman. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I still remember my first day at Blackwell Enterprises, the gleaming glass headquarters in downtown Chicago, the motivational quotes stenciled on every wall, the promise of meritocracy where results are all that matter. I believed it all back then. How naive I was. From day one, I outperformed every metric. While others celebrated hitting 80% of their quarterly goals, I was consistently at 150%. I developed a reputation as a closer, the person sales directors would call when an important prospect was wavering. My secret wasn't complicated. I genuinely cared about solving my clients' problems, not just making my numbers. By the end of my first year, I'd broken the company record for fastest path to gold-tier sales status. The CEO himself sent me a handwritten note. "Remarkable achievement, Olivia. Keep this up and your future here is limitless." Limitless. That word haunted me through 3 promotion cycles, watching men with half my numbers and twice my swagger move up the corporate ladder. Each time, the explanation was different but familiar. We need someone with more presence. The role requires gravitas. We're looking for natural leadership qualities. All code words I'd come to recognize. Still, I persisted. I mentored new hires. I developed sales strategies that became company standard. I built a client roster that generated consistent revenue. I told myself that results would eventually speak for themselves, that the right opportunity would come along to prove my worth beyond any doubt. That opportunity arrived in the form of Titan Global Systems. Titan was the corporate equivalent of Everest, a mega corporation that Blackwell had been trying to land for years. Their procurement process was legendary for its complexity, with multiple decision-makers across various departments. 3 different sales directors had tried and failed to get past the initial meetings. The last attempt had been led by Greg Peterson, VP of Sales and my direct supervisor, who had returned from their headquarters declaring them impossible to close. During a leadership meeting I was invited to attend to present on another client, not as an actual participant. I heard Greg telling the executive team they should stop wasting resources on Titan. "Some companies just aren't a good fit," he said, leaning back in his chair with the confidence of someone who's never had his judgment questioned. I couldn't help myself. "Actually," I interrupted, "I think we've been approaching them all wrong." The room fell silent. Greg's expression darkened. "Excuse me?" I swallowed hard but continued. Titan's new CFO came from Mercer Industries. I worked with her there in my previous role. Their procurement objections aren't about price or features. They're about implementation timelines and integration capabilities. We've been selling them on the wrong benefits. Bradley Marshall, our CEO, leaned forward. "You're suggesting you could land Titan?" Greg laughed, not a chuckle, but the kind of laugh meant to diminish. "Olivia's an excellent account manager, but Titan requires senior-level relationships and experience." Bradley looked between us. "But if she has a relationship with their CFO..." "I do," I confirmed, "and I've studied their recent earnings reports. They're under pressure to digitize their supply chain by Q3. Our solution is perfect, but they need to hear about the implementation timeline first, not the features." Greg was still shaking his head when Bradley made a decision that would change everything. Take a shot at it, Olivia. If you can make progress where 3 sales directors couldn't, I'd be impressed. And if she succeeds? Asked Diane Williams, our COO, who'd been quietly observing. Then we'll have a very interesting conversation about her future here, Bradley replied with a smile. Looking back, I should have gotten something more concrete than a vague promise. But I was so eager to prove myself that I practically floated out of that meeting, already planning my approach. That night, I didn't go home. I stayed at the office until 2 a.m., researching everything about Titan's business challenges, their failed digitization attempts, their board's priorities. I created a presentation that spoke directly to their timeline concerns, with detailed implementation schedules and integration pathways. The next day, I reached out to Sandra Watkins, Titan's CFO and my former contact. The email was brief, professional, and focused on their challenges rather than our solution. To my surprise, she responded within an hour, offering a 30-minute call the following day. That call turned into a video conference, which turned into an invitation to present to their procurement committee. Over the next 8 weeks, I practically lived and breathed Titan. I conducted technical discovery sessions with their IT team. I negotiated with our product department to adjust implementation timelines. I held weekend prep sessions to ensure every possible objection was anticipated and addressed. Greg's interest in my progress oscillated between skepticism and micromanagement. He insisted on joining several key calls, where he would interrupt my carefully constructed narrative to emphasize features that Titan had already deprioritized. After one particularly disastrous meeting where he talked over Titan's CTO, I requested a private conversation. Greg, I appreciate your involvement, I began carefully. But we're gaining traction by focusing on implementation speed, not feature depth. Could we align on the approach? His response was immediate and cold. I've been in this business for 15 years, Olivia. I think I know how enterprise sales works. You got this opportunity because of a personal connection, not sales expertise. Remember that. Despite these obstacles, I continued making progress. The procurement committee moved us to the final round of consideration. Their legal team began reviewing our contract terms. The scope expanded from their North American division to include European operations as well, potentially doubling the deal size. Through all of this, I kept detailed records of every interaction, every email, every call summary, every revised proposal, all meticulously documented and organized. It wasn't because I anticipated what would happen next. It was simply my way of managing complex sales cycles. After 3 intense months of work, countless nights and weekends sacrificed, and navigating the most complex procurement process I'd ever encountered, it happened. Titan Global Systems signed a contract worth $2, $1 million annually, with a 3-year commitment. The largest initial contract in Blackwell's history. The congratulations poured in immediately. Sandra, now my champion at Titan, personally called to thank me for making the process so smooth. Bradley sent a company-wide email praising the remarkable achievement. My fellow sales colleagues organized impromptu drinks to celebrate. Even some of the executives who had overlooked me for promotion stopped by my desk to offer congratulations. The only person conspicuously silent was Greg. The following Monday, I received a calendar invitation from him. Subject: Titan account. Management and team structure. Finally, I thought, the conversation about my future that Bradley had promised. I spent the weekend preparing my thoughts on how I could help expand the Titan relationship and which leadership role would best leverage my skills. When Monday arrived, I dressed with particular care, a charcoal gray suit that projected confidence without being showy, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back in a sleek style. Professional, executive, ready. I arrived at Greg's office at precisely 10 a.m. Through the glass walls, I could see he wasn't alone. Max Richardson, a sales manager who had joined the company just 8 months earlier, was sitting in one of the visitor chairs. Something in my stomach tightened, but I dismissed it as nerves. I knocked and entered. "Olivia, come in," Greg said, gesturing to the other chair. "You know Max, of course." "Of course," I replied, shaking Max's hand. Max had transferred from a competitor where he'd worked with Greg years earlier. His sales numbers were average at best, but he played golf with the executive team and had a knack for being included in high-level meetings. "I'll get right to it," Greg continued once I was seated. "The Titan account is a significant win for Blackwell, and we need to ensure it's managed appropriately going forward." I nodded, waiting for the acknowledgement of my achievement and discussion of my promotion. After careful consideration, I've decided that Max will be taking over as the Enterprise Account Director for Titan, effective immediately. The words hit me like a physical blow. I struggled to keep my expression neutral as Greg continued. "Max has the enterprise account management experience we need for a client of this caliber. He'll be building a team to support the relationship, and of course, preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. You'll be a valuable part of that team, Olivia." I looked between them, waiting for the punchline. When none came, I found my voice. "I don't understand. I brought in this account. I built the relationship with their team. They specifically requested me as their point of contact going forward." Greg's smile was patronizing. "And you'll still be involved. But as the account grows, we need someone with Max's strategic perspective at the helm. This is about putting the right structure in place for a client of this magnitude." "But Bradley said—" "Bradley and I have discussed this thoroughly," Greg interrupted. "He agrees that this is the right approach." I turned to Max, who at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Have you had any contact with Titan's team? Any involvement in the sales process at all?" Before Max could answer, Greg cut in. "Olivia, this isn't a negotiation. The decision has been made. Max starts transition meetings with Titan next week. I'll need you to provide him with all account documentation and make introductions to your contacts." My hands were trembling now, so I clasped them tightly in my lap. "Greg, with all due respect, I earned this. I spent 3 months landing this account when everyone else said it was impossible. I delivered the largest contract in company history. If that doesn't qualify me for advancement, what does?" Greg leaned back in his chair, studying me with a look I'd seen before, the one that said I just didn't get it. "This is exactly the problem, Olivia. You're focused on individual achievement, not team success. Leadership requires more than just closing deals. Max has closed exactly 0 enterprise deals since joining Blackwell," I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "How does that demonstrate leadership?" Greg's expression hardened. "Max understands the bigger picture. He has the presence, the strategic thinking, the leadership qualities needed at the executive level." I recognized the familiar code words and something inside me snapped. "This is absurd. You're taking my account, my achievement, and handing it to someone else because what? He plays golf? He reminds you of yourself? What exactly are these mysterious leadership qualities I'm missing?" Greg stood up, signaling the end of the discussion. "This attitude right here is precisely why you're not ready for an executive role. You're an excellent sales performer, Olivia, one of our best, but you're just not executive material. Not everyone is meant to lead." The dismissive tone, the casual cruelty of his assessment, it was so matter-of-fact, as if he were simply stating an obvious truth that I should have realized myself. "Max, could you give us a moment?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. After Max left, closing the door behind him, I looked directly at Greg. "Is it because I'm a woman?" Greg had the audacity to look offended. Don't make this about gender, Olivia. This is about who's the right fit for an executive position. And in 4 years, not once have I been the right fit, despite consistently outperforming every metric. Yet men with half my results are promoted regularly. What am I supposed to conclude? You're supposed to be a team player and accept the structure that best serves the company, he replied coldly. This conversation is over. I need the Titan documentation by end of day. As I stood to leave, something caught my eye. On Greg's credenza was a folder with the Titan logo and a post-it note in handwriting I didn't recognize. Max, talking points for Titan intro call. He had planned this all along. Before the contract was even signed, he had already decided to give my account to Max. I walked out without another word, my mind racing but oddly clear. For 4 years, I had played by their rules, believed in meritocracy, trusted that results would eventually speak for themselves. For 4 years, I had swallowed my frustration, worked harder, tried to embody whatever nebulous quality they claimed I was missing. No more. As I returned to my desk, I didn't slam drawers or cry in the bathroom or vent to colleagues. Instead, I opened my laptop and began to plan. If Greg thought I would simply hand over my hard-won account and fade into the background, he was about to learn how thoroughly he had misjudged me and just how executive my thinking could be. The first step was to protect myself. I created a secure folder with all my Titan documentation, every email, every proposal, every call record that proved my role in securing the account. I forwarded key communications to my personal email, being careful to include only factual information that wasn't confidential. Next, I needed to understand what legal protection I might have. I reviewed Blackwell's employee handbook, paying special attention to promotion criteria and discrimination policies. Nothing explicitly prohibited what Greg had done, but there were clear statements about merit-based advancement and fostering an inclusive environment. The most important element, however, was Titan itself. How would they react to being handed off to Max, someone who had no role in the sales process and no relationship with their team? I suspected Sandra in particular would not be pleased. That's when I made a strategic decision that would ultimately change everything. I would prepare the most thorough, detailed account transition document ever created. I would document everything about the Titan relationship, every contact, every concern, every future opportunity, every personal connection I'd established. I would make it impossible for anyone to claim I hadn't been transparent or cooperative. And in doing so, I would create an irrefutable record of exactly who had built this relationship from the ground up. For the next 3 days, I worked methodically, compiling my knowledge of Titan into a comprehensive guide. I included notes on the personal preferences of key contacts, like how Sandra preferred direct communication first thing in the morning, or how their CTO responded better to technical details in writing before calls. I detailed the history of every objection they had raised and how I had addressed it. I mapped their entire organizational structure, highlighting decision-makers and influencers at every level. When finished, the document was over 40 pages long, a testament to the depth of my engagement with Titan and my understanding of their business. On Thursday afternoon, I sent it to both Greg and Max with a brief, professional email. As requested, attached is the comprehensive Titan account documentation. Please let me know if you have any questions or need clarification on any points. Greg replied almost immediately, "This looks thorough. Good work." Max's response came an hour later. "Thanks for this, Olivia. Would you be willing to join the introduction call with Titan next week? Might help with the transition." And there it was, the opportunity I had been waiting for. "Of course," I replied, happy to help ensure a smooth transition for the client. The introduction call was scheduled for Tuesday at 10 a.m. Max sent a meeting invitation with Greg copied, along with Sandra and 2 other executives from Titan. The subject line read, "Blackwell Titan Relationship, Introduction to New Account Director." I spent the weekend preparing, but not in the way they expected. I wasn't rehearsing how to gracefully hand over my client. I was organizing evidence, crafting questions, and preparing for the moment when I would finally stop playing by rules designed to keep me in my place. Tuesday morning arrived. I dressed in my most professional outfit, not the muted, non-threatening attire. I usually chose to avoid standing out, but a sharp navy suit that conveyed authority. I pulled my dark hair back into a sleek bun and applied makeup that was subtle but polished. Today, I wasn't trying to fade into the background. Today, I wanted to be seen. The conference room was already set up when I arrived. Greg and Max were huddled at one end of the table, reviewing what appeared to be presentation slides. They both looked up when I entered, Greg with mild surprise. "Olivia, you're early," he observed. I wanted to make sure everything was prepared. "Properly," I replied, taking a seat across from them rather than next to them, a small act of separation that didn't go unnoticed. At precisely 10 a.m., the video conference system chimed. Sandra's face appeared on the screen, along with Marcus Reed, Titan's CTO, and Elena Becker, their operations director. All key decision-makers I had carefully cultivated relationships with during the sales process. "Olivia!" Sandra exclaimed with genuine warmth. "Wonderful to see you. We've been telling everyone about the incredible work you did to get this partnership across the finish line." Before I could respond, Greg leaned forward. "Good morning, Sandra. I'm Greg Peterson, VP of Sales at Blackwell. Thank you for taking the time today. We're excited to introduce Max Richardson, who will be serving as your Enterprise Account Director going forward." There was a brief pause. Sandra's expression cooled noticeably. "I don't understand. We've been working with Olivia throughout this process. Our understanding was that she would continue to be our primary contact." Greg smiled smoothly. "Olivia did excellent work during the sales phase, but now that we're moving into implementation and ongoing account management, we're bringing in our enterprise leadership team. Max has extensive experience managing relationships of this caliber." Sandra glanced at me, then back at Greg. "This is unexpected. We developed a strong working relationship with Olivia. She demonstrated an exceptional understanding of our business challenges. And she'll still be involved," Greg assured. Max will be building a dedicated team for Titan, with Olivia as a key member. This is simply about providing you with the right level of strategic support." Elena, the operations director, spoke up. "Will this change affect our implementation timeline?" Olivia made specific commitments regarding our Q3 requirements. "Not at all," Max jumped in, clearly eager to establish himself. "I've reviewed the entire account history and am fully up to speed on your priorities. In fact, I've prepared a presentation outlining our go-forward strategy." As Max began sharing his screen, I watched Sandra's expression grow increasingly reserved. The presentation was slick, but generic, clearly something Max had repurposed from another client. It emphasized features Titan had specifically deprioritized, and made no mention of the custom implementation pathway I had negotiated. After a few minutes, Marcus, the CTO, interrupted. "Excuse me, but this doesn't align with what we discussed with Olivia. Our primary concern is integration speed, not feature depth." Max faltered slightly. "Of course we can adjust." "Perhaps," I interjected calmly, "it would be helpful if I provided some context about the specific commitments made during our discussions." Greg shot me a warning glance, but Sandra immediately seized on my offer. "Yes, Olivia, please. I think we need clarity on whether our understanding of this partnership is aligned." This was my moment. I had planned to ease into it, to let the disparities between Max's presentation and Titan's actual needs create natural questions. But now, with the opening Sandra had provided, I decided on a more direct approach. "Thank you, Sandra. First, I want to assure all of you that the commitments I made regarding implementation timelines and integration pathways remain our priority. What you're seeing in this presentation doesn't reflect the customized approach we developed together. I paused, then continued. I think it's important for transparency that you understand what's happening here. Until 3 days ago, I had every expectation of continuing to lead the Titan relationship as part of a promotion to Enterprise Account Director. I spent 3 months working directly with your team, developing a solution precisely tailored to your needs and delivering what is now the largest initial contract in Blackwell's history. Greg's face hardened. Olivia, this isn't... Please let me finish, Greg, I said firmly. Titan deserves to understand who they're partnering with. I turned back to the screen. Despite the success of this deal and the relationship we've built, I was informed that I would not be receiving the promotion that typically accompanies such achievement. Instead, Max, who had no involvement in the sales process and no prior contact with Titan, was appointed to the role. When I asked for an explanation, I was told that I'm just not executive material. The silence that followed was profound. Sandra and her colleagues exchanged glances that communicated volumes. Greg's face had turned an alarming shade of red. That's troubling to hear, Sandra finally said, particularly since your executive capabilities were precisely what impressed us. Your strategic approach to our business challenges demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership we value in our partners. Marcus nodded in agreement. The reason we chose Blackwell over competitors was Olivia's ability to translate technical capabilities into business outcomes. That's an executive skill set, if I've ever seen one. Greg attempted to regain control of the meeting. I appreciate your perspective, but internal staffing decisions are based on numerous factors beyond a single account. I can assure you that Max is highly qualified. I'm not questioning Max's qualifications, Sandra interrupted. I'm questioning Blackwell's judgment in removing the person who demonstrated such a thorough understanding of our needs. It makes us concerned about your commitment to the promises made during the sales process. Elena leaned forward. Perhaps we should discuss this internally before proceeding further. This represents a significant change from what we expected. Greg's forced smile was painful to watch. Of course, we understand, but I want to emphasize that Olivia will still be involved with the account. In what capacity exactly? Sandra asked pointedly. Greg hesitated just long enough for me to recognize my opening. That's an excellent question, I said. Greg, perhaps you could clarify my role moving forward, since we haven't discussed it in detail. He was trapped, and he knew it. If he diminished my role, he risked alienating Titan further. If he elevated it, he contradicted his earlier decision. Olivia will be a senior member of the account team, he managed, the vagueness of the statement hanging awkwardly in the air. Sandra's gaze was piercing. We signed this contract with certain expectations about who would be managing the relationship. This feels like a bait and switch, bringing in Olivia to close the deal, then substituting someone else once the contract is signed. That was never our intention, Greg insisted, but the damage was done. We'd like to request a meeting with your CEO, Sandra said firmly. Before we proceed any further with implementation, we need to ensure we're aligned on expectations and commitments. Greg's expression froze. A client requesting to speak with the CEO was never a good sign, especially a brand new client of Titan's size. I'm sure we can address any concerns without escalating to that level. This isn't negotiable, Sandra cut in. We're making a significant investment in Blackwell's solution. We have the right to ensure the promises made during procurement will be honored during implementation. The call ended shortly after, with Greg promising to arrange the meeting with Bradley. As soon as the screen went dark, he turned on me, fury evident in every line of his face. What the hell was that? He demanded. You just sabotaged a critical client relationship to settle a personal score. I met his gaze calmly. I told the truth, Greg. I didn't exaggerate or misrepresent anything. If the truth damages the relationship, perhaps the problem lies with the decisions being made, not with my transparency. You're fired, he spat. Clear out your desk. I want you out of the building within the hour. I stood, smoothing my suit jacket. I expected as much. I'll wait for HR to process the termination properly. As I walked toward the door, Max finally spoke. For what it's worth, Olivia, I didn't know about the promises made to you. I wouldn't have accepted the role if I'd known. Whether that was true or merely an attempt to distance himself from what was clearly becoming a disaster, I couldn't tell. But it didn't matter now. Good luck with Titan, I said. You're going to need it. I left the conference room with my head held high, even as I felt Greg's glare burning into my back. The office suddenly seemed unnaturally quiet, colleagues pretending to work while stealing glances, administrative staff finding sudden reasons to shuffle papers nearby. News traveled fast in our open floor plan, and the tension radiating from that conference room had been palpable to everyone. At my desk, I began methodically collecting my personal items. The framed photo of my parents at their 30th anniversary. The small jade plant I'd kept alive for 3 years. The handwritten client thank you notes I'd saved as reminders on difficult days. I worked quietly, efficiently, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing me upset. Marianne from HR appeared within 15 minutes, her expression a practiced blend of professional concern and careful distance. Olivia, can we speak privately? She asked, gesturing toward a small meeting room. I nodded, following her without comment. Once inside, she closed the door and sighed deeply. Greg has requested immediate termination for insubordination and unprofessional conduct, she began, not quite meeting my eyes. He's alleging you deliberately sabotaged a client relationship. I smiled slightly. Is that what he's calling it? Marianne shifted uncomfortably. He said you contradicted leadership in front of a major client and disclosed internal staffing decisions inappropriately. I answered a direct question from the client about why the person who sold them our solution was being replaced without their knowledge. I replied calmly. I stated verifiable facts without embellishment. If those facts reflect poorly on Blackwell's decision-making, that's hardly my responsibility. Marianne's professional mask slipped slightly, revealing a flash of what might have been sympathy. She'd been at Blackwell almost as long as I had, long enough to have witnessed similar patterns. Nevertheless, she continued, I need to process your termination paperwork. There will be 2 weeks of severance, and you'll need to sign this non-disparagement agreement to receive it. She slid a document across the table. I didn't touch it. I won't be signing that, I said. And I believe immediate termination without an investigation violates Blackwell's own HR policies regarding progressive discipline. Marianne blinked. Well, there are exceptions for serious misconduct, which would need to be thoroughly documented, not processed within minutes of an alleged incident, I interrupted. Besides, I have reason to believe this termination is retaliatory and potentially discriminatory given the context. The HR professional in her immediately recognized the implied threat. Those are serious allegations, Olivia. Yes, they are, and I have substantial documentation to support them. I leaned forward slightly. Let me propose an alternative. Process this as a suspension with pay pending investigation, as your own handbook requires. That gives everyone time to consider next steps more carefully. I could almost see the calculations running behind her eyes. The potential legal exposure, the procedural violations, the fact that Titan was already requesting a meeting with the CEO over this very issue. I'll need to consult with legal, she finally said. Of course, I replied. I'll wait. While Marianne stepped out to make her calls, I retrieved my phone and sent a brief text message to Sandra at Titan. Thank you for your support today. Blackwell is attempting to terminate me in response. If your team still wants to speak with Bradley, now would be an ideal time to make that request formal. The response came almost immediately. Already done. Copy of the email sent to your personal address. Stay strong. When Marianne returned 20 minutes later, her demeanor had shifted subtly. Given the circumstances, she said carefully, we'll be processing this as a paid administrative leave pending a full review. Please surrender your badge and laptop before leaving the building. We'll be in touch regarding next steps. I handed over my badge without comment, but regarding the laptop, I simply said, I'll need to be present when IT extracts my personal files, as well as evidence pertinent to my situation. Again, Marianne recognized the legal implications. I'll arrange for that tomorrow. Please don't discuss this situation with other employees or clients while the investigation is pending. I nodded, gathering my belongings. As I walked through the office toward the elevator, I kept my expression neutral, my posture straight, my pace unhurried. I didn't look toward Greg's office, though I could feel eyes following me from that direction. I didn't stop to explain to curious colleagues or accept sympathetic glances. Only when the elevator doors closed, providing the first moment of privacy since the confrontation, did I allow myself a deep, shaky breath. My hands trembled slightly as the adrenaline that had carried me through the morning began to subside. I hadn't planned to accelerate matters so dramatically, but Sandra's unexpected support had created a perfect opportunity. And now I was suspended, likely to be fired once they found a procedurally correct way to do it, with a powerful enemy in Greg and an uncertain future ahead. Yet despite all that, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years at Blackwell. The lightness that comes with finally standing up for yourself. The real battle, I knew, was just beginning. The next morning, I arrived at Blackwell at precisely the appointed time for my file extraction. The building felt different as a visitor, the security guard asking for ID, the temporary badge that marked me as an outsider, the curious glances from employees who'd seen me leave just yesterday with a box of personal items. Marianne met me in the lobby, accompanied by a nervous-looking IT technician named Raj, whom I knew from previous technical issues. This shouldn't take long, Marianne assured me, leading us to a small conference room where my laptop waited. I've prepared a list of files that should be preserved, I said, handing her a printout. These include personal documents as well as evidence pertinent to my situation. Marianne's expression tightened at the word evidence, but she nodded, passing the list to Raj. We'll make copies of everything listed. The process took nearly 2 hours. I insisted on verifying each file before it was copied, much to Marianne's growing impatience. But I wasn't about to leave anything to chance. These documents were my protection. As we were finishing, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Olivia, this is Bradley Marshall. Please call me at your earliest convenience. Attached was a private number. I glanced up to find Marianne watching me curiously. If we're finished here, I have a call to make, I said, gathering my things. She nodded. We'll be in touch regarding the investigation. In the meantime, don't contact employees or clients, I remember, I finished for her. Though I should note that if clients contact me directly, prohibiting me from responding could be viewed as interference with established business relationships. Marianne's professional smile never wavered, but her eyes hardened slightly. Just exercise good judgment, Olivia. Outside, I found a quiet coffee shop 2 blocks from the Blackwell building. After ordering a latte, I settled into a corner table and dialed the number Bradley had provided. Olivia, thank you for calling back so quickly, he answered, his tone carefully neutral. I understand there was an incident yesterday regarding the Titan account. That's one way to describe it, I replied. Has Sandra reached out to you? A pause. Yes. She and her team have expressed serious concerns about the account transition. They've requested a meeting this afternoon. And will you be honoring that request? Of course, he said, sounding slightly surprised at the question. Titan represents a significant relationship for Blackwell. I'd be remiss not to address their concerns personally. I took a sip of my latte, considering my next words carefully. And my suspension? Will that be addressed as well? Bradley sighed, a sound that conveyed both frustration and calculation. That's partially why I'm calling. Given the sensitivity of the situation with Titan, I'd like you to attend the meeting this afternoon. Now it was my turn to pause. Let me understand this correctly. I've been suspended pending investigation for allegedly sabotaging a client. Relationship? Yet you want me present for a meeting with that same client? The circumstances are complicated, he admitted. But your presence would be helpful in preserving the Titan relationship, which remains a priority for Blackwell, regardless of other issues. I allowed the silence to stretch for a moment before responding. I'd be willing to attend, but only under certain conditions. What conditions? His tone sharpened slightly. First, my suspension is lifted immediately, with full restoration of pay and benefits. Second, Greg is not present at the meeting. His antagonism would be counterproductive. Third, we agree to an independent review of the promotion decision and the events leading to my suspension. Bradley's surprise was audible. Those are significant demands, Olivia. They're reasonable considerations given the circumstances, I countered. I'm offering to help Blackwell salvage a multi-million-dollar relationship that I built and that others have jeopardized. I think that warrants some good faith accommodation. Another long pause followed. I could almost hear him weighing options. The risk of proceeding without me versus the precedent of yielding to an employee's demands. I can agree to the first two conditions, he finally said. The suspension will be lifted, and Greg won't attend today's meeting. Regarding the third point, I'm willing to ensure a fair review is conducted, though I can't guarantee it will be fully independent. It wasn't everything I wanted, but it was a start. I'll accept that for now, I said. What time is the meeting? 3 o'clock, main boardroom. I'd appreciate if you could arrive 30 minutes early so we can align on approach. I'll be there, I promised. After ending the call, I sat back and considered the rapid evolution of events. In just over 24 hours, I had gone from being dismissed as not executive material to being essential enough that the CEO himself was negotiating for my cooperation. It was a precarious position, certainly. Bradley's interest was in protecting Blackwell, not vindicating me, but it was leverage I hadn't anticipated having so quickly. I spent the next few hours at the coffee shop, preparing for the meeting. I reviewed my notes on Titan's priorities, refreshed my knowledge of the implementation timeline, and organized my thoughts on how to address the situation constructively, while still maintaining my dignity and position. At precisely 2:30, I walked back into the Blackwell building, this time with my regular employee badge that had been hastily reactivated. The receptionist's eyes widened slightly. Obviously word of my suspension had circulated, but she greeted me professionally and directed me to the executive floor. Bradley was waiting in the boardroom alone, reviewing documents at the head of the long mahogany table. He looked up as I entered, his expression a carefully crafted blend of authority and approachability, the CEO face I'd seen him deploy in countless meetings. Olivia, thank you for coming, he said, standing to greet me. I appreciate your willingness to help resolve this situation. Of course, I replied, taking a seat not directly beside him but close enough to signal collaboration. Titan's success remains important to me, regardless of internal issues. He nodded, studying me with new interest. I've reviewed the notes from yesterday's call. Sandra Watkins was quite emphatic about your contributions to securing their business. We built a strong working relationship during the sales process, I acknowledged. Titan values transparency and expertise, which is why the sudden transition concerned them. Bradley leaned back slightly. Help me understand what happened from your perspective. Greg's version paints a picture of insubordination and unprofessional behavior. I'm not surprised, I said evenly, but the facts are straightforward. I spent 3 months securing a $1 million contract with a client everyone else had failed to close. Upon success, the account was immediately reassigned to Max Richardson, who had zero involvement in the process. When I questioned this decision, I was explicitly told I wasn't executive material despite my performance. I maintained steady eye contact as I continued. During yesterday's introduction call, Titan's team asked direct questions about why I was being replaced. I answered truthfully without embellishment. Their negative reaction wasn't to my behavior, Bradley. It was to Blackwell's decision-making. He absorbed this in silence, tapping a pen against the table. The executive promotion criteria are complex, Olivia. It's not always just about sales performance. I'm well aware, I replied. But when consistently outstanding performance is repeatedly overlooked and vague, subjective criteria are cited as justification, it creates a pattern that's difficult to interpret as anything but biased. Bradley's expression tightened slightly. That's a serious implication. It's a serious problem, I countered. One that's now affecting Blackwell's relationship with a major client. Titan doesn't care about our internal politics. They care about working with someone who understands their business and can deliver on promises made. Before Bradley could respond, there was a knock at the door. Diane Williams, our COO, entered, looking momentarily surprised to see me already there. Olivia, she said, recovering quickly. I didn't expect. Well, it's good you're here. Sandra just called. They're running 10 minutes late. Bradley nodded. Fine. That gives us time to align on our approach. He turned to me. Olivia, I need your commitment that today's discussion will focus on moving forward productively, not relitigating past decisions. I met his gaze directly. My priority is Titan's successful implementation, but I won't pretend the current situation is sustainable. They need to know who will be managing their account and why they should trust that person. Diane, who had been observing our exchange with interest, spoke up. Perhaps we should consider a compromise. Olivia clearly has Titan's confidence. Could we structure a role that leverages that relationship while addressing other considerations? Bradley frowned slightly. Let's see how the conversation develops before making commitments. The key is to restore Titan's confidence in Blackwell, as a whole. At 3:10, the video conference system chimed. Sandra's face appeared on the screen, along with Marcus and Elena from yesterday's call. A new addition was James Harrington, Titan's CEO, a significant escalation that wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Mr. Marshall, thank you for making time. For this discussion, James began, his tone formal. We felt it necessary to address some concerns that have emerged regarding our new partnership with Blackwell. Bradley shifted into full CEO mode, his voice resonant with leadership authority. Of course, Mr. Harrington. We value Titan's business greatly and want to ensure a successful relationship. I understand there were some questions about account management that we're eager to clarify. Sandra spoke next, her gaze finding me. Olivia, I'm glad to see you're part of this conversation. Given yesterday's events, we weren't sure that would be the case. All eyes in the room turned to me briefly. Bradley nodded slightly, ceding the floor. I appreciate your concern, Sandra, I replied carefully. There was a brief misunderstanding about my role, but I'm fully engaged in ensuring Titan's success with our solution. James Harrington leaned forward slightly. Let's be direct here. We selected Blackwell largely based on Olivia's approach to our business challenges. Yesterday, we learned she was being removed from leadership of our account, despite her critical role in establishing the relationship. When she explained the situation honestly, we understand there were repercussions. This raises serious concerns about Blackwell's judgment and internal culture. Bradley maintained his composed expression, but I noticed his knuckles whitening as he clasped his hands on the table. "Mr. Harrington, I want to assure you that Olivia remains a valued member of our team. The transition discussion yesterday could have been handled more effectively, and for that, I apologize. We're committed to providing Titan with the highest level of service and expertise." Elena, Titan's operations director, wasn't satisfied. "With respect, Mr. Marshall, that doesn't address our specific concern. Will Olivia be leading our account implementation as originally anticipated, or not?" The room fell silent. This was the central question, the one that would determine not just my future, but the stability of the Titan relationship. Bradley glanced at me, then at Diane, clearly weighing his options. Diane spoke into the silence. "If I may suggest an approach, Olivia has clearly established a strong foundation with your team. What if we structured a dedicated account leadership role for her focused specifically on Titan's implementation success?" Sandra's expression remained skeptical. "What exactly would that entail? We need clarity on who has ultimate authority for our account." Bradley made his decision. "Olivia will serve as executive client partner for Titan Global, with direct reporting to me. She'll have full authority for implementation decisions and team leadership for your account." The title was new, created on the spot, but the intent was clear. It was a face-saving compromise that gave me effective control of the Titan relationship while creating a special designation rather than the standard promotion path. James and his team exchanged glances, communicating silently. "That would address our immediate concerns," James finally said. "But we'd like to see that formalized in writing, including a clear definition of responsibilities and authority." "Of course," Bradley agreed smoothly. "We'll draft that today and have it to you by tomorrow morning." Sandra looked directly at me. "Olivia, are you comfortable with this arrangement?" It was a critical moment. Bradley had offered a solution that gave me much of what I wanted, but positioned as a special accommodation rather than an acknowledgement of earned advancement. Accept too readily and I'd forfeit the larger principle. Refuse, and I'd appear unreasonable. "I appreciate the recognition of my role in establishing this partnership," I said carefully. "The executive client partner position sounds promising, though I'd want to review the formal description to ensure it provides the necessary authority to deliver on Titan's expectations. My primary concern remains your successful implementation and business outcomes." Sandra nodded, satisfied with the measured response. James wrapped up the conversation with additional questions about implementation timelines, which I answered, with the detailed knowledge they had come to expect from me. By the time the call ended 30 minutes later, the tension had noticeably diminished. Titan seemed cautiously reassured, and Bradley had avoided a potential client loss. As the screen went dark, Bradley turned to me. "That went as well as could be expected. Thank you for your professionalism." "What happens next?" I asked directly. Bradley exchanged glances with Diane. "We'll draft the executive client partner role as promised. You'll return to normal duties effective immediately, with focus on the Titan implementation." "And Greg?" I asked, the question hanging in the air. Bradley's expression hardened slightly. "I'll be speaking with him separately about how this situation was handled. That's not your concern right now." "With respect," I countered, "it very much is my concern." He attempted to terminate me for answering a client's question honestly. His judgment directly jeopardized a major account. If he remains in a position of authority over me or the Titan relationship, that creates an untenable situation. Diane stepped in. "Perhaps we should restructure reporting lines. Olivia, with this new role, you could report directly to me instead of Greg. That would create appropriate separation while we assess the broader situation." Bradley nodded slowly. "That's reasonable for now. We'll make that adjustment immediately." He stood, signaling the end of the discussion. "I need to prepare for my conversation with Greg. Diane will work with you on the role definition." After he left, Diane studied me with new interest. "You handled that skillfully, Olivia. Not many people could navigate such a delicate situation while suspended." "I simply focused on what was best for the client," I replied, gathering my notes. "That's always been my approach." "Indeed," she said thoughtfully, "and it's precisely that focus that should have been recognized earlier." She hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, I've observed your contributions for some time. This outcome, while arriving through unorthodox circumstances, is overdue." I appreciated the acknowledgement, but recognized it for what it was: a belated recognition from an executive who had been present for previous promotion discussions where I'd been overlooked. "Thank you, Diane. I look forward to reviewing the role definition." As I left the boardroom, I felt the weight of many eyes following me. Executive assistants who had overheard snippets of conversation, colleagues who had witnessed my departure yesterday and unexpected return today. Word would travel quickly that something significant had changed. Back at my desk, which had remained untouched during my brief absence, I found a small jade plant, identical to the one I'd taken home, with a note from my sales team. "However, this shakes out, we're with you." The simple gesture of solidarity brought the first genuine smile to my face in days. I had just begun organizing my Titan implementation notes when a commotion from the executive wing caught everyone's attention. Greg's voice, raised in unmistakable anger, carried across the open floor plan. "This is absurd. I'm being undercut by my own subordinate, and you're taking her side?" Though I couldn't hear Bradley's response, the tone was clearly firm. Moments later, Greg emerged from the CEO's office, face flushed with anger. He stormed through the sales floor, pointedly avoiding looking in my direction, and disappeared into his own office, slamming the door behind him. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, gradually, the normal sounds of office work resumed. Keyboards clicking, phones ringing, hushed conversations. But something fundamental had shifted. The invulnerability that had surrounded Greg for so long had cracked visibly. I turned back to my computer, outwardly composed but inwardly processing the rapid evolution of events. In just over 24 hours, I had gone from being dismissed as not executive material to being appointed to a newly created executive position with direct reporting to the COO. It wasn't precisely the vindication I had sought. The special nature of the role still felt like an exception rather than a recognition of my rightful place. But it was a significant reversal of fortune. More importantly, it was a platform from which I could build. With Titan's support and direct access to senior leadership, I now had visibility that had previously been blocked. The question was how to use it effectively, not just for my immediate benefit, but to address the systemic issues that had created this situation in the first place. My contemplation was interrupted by an email notification. The sender was Olivia Chen, another high-performing sales representative who, like me, had been repeatedly passed over for advancement despite stellar results. "Whatever you did, it's causing earthquakes. Lunch tomorrow, we need to talk." I smiled slightly as I typed a simple response. "Absolutely. There's a lot to discuss." The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. I reconnected with the Titan implementation team, reassuring them about the continuity of the project. I fielded curious inquiries from colleagues, answering with professional discretion rather than office gossip. I began drafting my vision for the implementation process, knowing that exceptional delivery now would further solidify my position. At 5:45 p.m., an email arrived from Diane with the subject line, "Executive Client Partner, Role Definition, Draft." The attachment outlined a position with significant authority: budget oversight, team selection, direct client relationship management, and strategic decision-making for the Titan account. The compensation was listed as TBD pending HR review, but a handwritten note indicated it would include an executive bonus structure. It was, by any objective measure, a win. Yet as I reviewed the document, I couldn't help noticing that it was framed as a special case created for unique client circumstances, rather than a recognition of leadership capabilities that should have been acknowledged long before Titan forced the issue. I was still digesting this when a final email arrived. From Greg, sent to the entire sales organization with the subject line, Organizational Announcement. Effective immediately, Olivia Chen will be transitioning to a specialized role managing the Titan Global account, reporting directly to Diane Williams. Please direct all Titan-related matters to Olivia going forward. Max Richardson will continue as Enterprise Account Director, focusing on other strategic accounts. Thank you for your continued dedication to our clients' success. The carefully worded message contained no congratulations, no acknowledgement of my achievement in landing Titan, no mention of the executive in my new title. It was a masterclass in grudging compliance dressed up as a routine organizational update. I closed my laptop, satisfied nonetheless. Greg's petty framing couldn't change the reality. I had won this round decisively. But as I gathered my things to leave, I knew this was just the beginning. The real work lay ahead. Leveraging this position to create lasting change, not just for myself, but for others facing the same invisible barriers. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Amanda's lunch invitation suggested I wasn't the only one. Seeing this as a potential inflection point, there would be resistance, certainly. Greg wouldn't simply accept this outcome, and others who benefited from the status quo would be watching warily. But for tonight, I allowed myself to savor the victory. As I walked out of the building into the early evening air, I felt lighter than I had in years, unburdened by the constant pressure to prove my worth to people determined not to see it. Whatever came next, I had broken through a barrier that had seemed impenetrable just days ago. Sometimes I reflected as I hailed a taxi home, the best revenge isn't elaborate or vengeful at all. Sometimes it's simply refusing to accept limitations placed upon you by others, and forcing them to confront the reality of your true capabilities. My phone buzzed with a text from Sandra. Congratulations on the new role. Looking forward to continuing our work together. I smiled as I texted back, "Thank you for your support. This is just the beginning." And it truly was. The next few weeks unfolded with the intensity of a high-stakes chess match. On the surface, everything appeared to stabilize quickly. I assembled a dedicated team for the Titan implementation, selecting members based on merit rather than politics. With Diane's support, I secured the necessary resources to ensure flawless execution. The formal role definition was finalized with compensation that reflected executive standing, including equity options previously reserved for director-level positions and above. Titan, for their part, seemed more confident than ever in their decision to partner with Blackwell. Our weekly status calls became showcases for effective collaboration. Their initial concerns about the transition faded as they experienced the focused attention and strategic insight they had originally been promised. Beneath this successful exterior, however, currents of resistance and resentment flowed. Greg maintained a cold professionalism in our limited interactions, but his influence was evident in subtle ways. Certain resources became inexplicably delayed. Team members I hadn't selected would sometimes receive conflicting guidance. Information that should have been shared proactively often reached me only after persistent follow-up. None of these obstacles was insurmountable, but together, they created friction that wouldn't have existed under normal circumstances. It was organizational passive aggression at its finest, nothing overt enough to justify formal complaints, but a constant reminder that my victory hadn't been universally celebrated. More illuminating were my conversations with other overlooked high performers, beginning with that lunch with Amanda. Over salads at a cafe safely removed from office eavesdroppers, she had been direct. "How did you do it? I've been hitting 140% of target for 2 years and got passed over twice for promotions that went to guys who barely make quota. I had a client who wouldn't accept the substitution, I explained. Not everyone has that leverage. She nodded, frustrated but understanding. So the lesson is, we need client pressure to get what we've earned? The actual results don't matter? They should matter, I corrected her. And now that I have some influence, I intend to make sure they do. That conversation led to others. Sarah from Enterprise Solutions, who had created the implementation methodology now used company-wide without recognition. Miguel from Technical Sales, whose innovative AI demos had significantly improved conversion rates, but who remained stuck in a junior role. Each had stories that echoed mine: exceptional performance overlooked, vague feedback about not being ready or lacking some indefinable quality, watching as others who fit a more traditional executive image advanced instead. 3 weeks after my confrontation with Greg, I presented Diane with a comprehensive analysis of promotion patterns within the sales organization over the past 3 years. The data was striking. Women and minorities with outstanding performance metrics were 64% less likely to advance than white male counterparts with comparable or even inferior results. This isn't just about me, I explained as she reviewed the findings. It's a systemic issue affecting our ability to retain top talent and maximize results. I've included recommendations for more objective promotion criteria and transparent evaluation processes. Diane studied me thoughtfully. This is thorough work, Olivia, and the timing is interesting. The board has been asking questions about what happened with Titan and what it reveals about our internal processes. Then perhaps this analysis would be valuable for them to review as well, I suggested. It provides context for how the Titan situation developed and why it matters beyond just one account or one employee. She nodded slowly. I'll bring this to the executive committee next week. In the meantime, how is the Titan implementation progressing? Excellently, I replied. We're ahead of schedule on all major milestones, and they've already identified expansion opportunities in their European division. I've prepared a preliminary proposal that could increase annual revenue by another $800,000. That's impressive, Diane acknowledged. You're proving your executive capabilities beyond question. I accepted the compliment with a nod, but we both knew the real test wasn't my individual performance. It was whether the system itself could change to recognize merit consistently, not just when forced by external pressure. The answer began to emerge the following week. Bradley called me to his office late on a Thursday afternoon. When I arrived, I was surprised to find not just Bradley, but also 2 board members I recognized from company events, Patricia Alvarez, who chaired the governance committee, and Richard Takahashi, who led strategic planning. Olivia, thank you for joining us, Bradley began, his tone more formal than usual. Patricia and Richard have been reviewing the situation with Titan and your broader analysis of our promotion practices. Patricia spoke next, her direct gaze evaluating me with new interest. Your report was illuminating, Ms. Chen. The patterns you identified raise serious questions about how we develop and advance talent at Blackwell. The business impact is significant. As well, Richard added. The cost of turnover when high performers leave, the lost opportunity of untapped leadership potential. It's not just an equity issue, it's a shareholder value issue. I maintained a professional demeanor despite my surprise at their level of engagement. I appreciate your taking these concerns seriously. The data speaks for itself. Patricia nodded. Indeed it does. Which leads us to some decisions the board has made. Bradley? The CEO shifted slightly, and I realized with sudden clarity that whatever was coming next hadn't entirely been his idea. We're implementing several changes to address the issues you've identified. First, a complete revision of our promotion. Criteria with clear, objective metrics. Second, a blind review process for initial advancement decisions. And third, A comprehensive audit of recent promotion patterns with appropriate adjustments where disparities are identified. That's significant, I said carefully, processing the scope of these changes. There's more, Patricia continued. We're creating a new position, Vice President of Talent Strategy and Client Excellence. This role will oversee both the implementation of these new processes and the development of key client relationships where specialized leadership is needed. Bradley picked up the thread. Given your unique perspective and proven abilities, we'd like to offer you this position, Olivia. You would report directly to me, with responsibility for ensuring our internal practices align with our stated values of meritocracy and excellence. The offer was unexpected, far beyond the scope of what I had imagined when I began this journey. It wasn't just vindication, it was structural change with me positioned to guide its implementation. This is a significant opportunity, I acknowledged. I'd need to understand more about the parameters and authority of the role. Of course, Patricia agreed. We've prepared a detailed description for your review. But I want to be clear about one point. This isn't a symbolic position. It comes with real authority to implement change and a seat at the executive leadership table. And what about Greg? I asked directly. The question had to be addressed. The three exchanged glances before Bradley responded. Greg has been offered a choice: adapt to the new standards and processes under your partial oversight, or transition to a different role outside the sales organization. He's currently considering his options. In other words, he would either have to accept my authority in certain areas or leave his position entirely. It was a profound reversal of the power dynamic that had defined our relationship for years. I appreciate the transparency, I said. I'd like some time to review the role description before making a decision. Of course, Bradley agreed. Take the weekend to consider it. We can reconnect on Monday. As I left the executive floor, my mind was racing with possibilities. The offer represented everything I had worked toward and more: recognition, advancement, the power to create meaningful change. Yet I also recognized it for what it was: a response to a crisis that had forced the board's hand, not a natural evolution of the company's culture. The real question wasn't whether I would accept. The opportunity was too significant to decline, but how I would use this position once I had it. Would I be able to create lasting change, or would the organization's resistance eventually dilute my efforts? Would I become part of the system I had challenged, or maintain the perspective that had brought me to this moment? By Monday morning, I had my answer. I accepted the position with specific conditions regarding budget authority, reporting structure, and performance metrics that would ensure the role had the necessary influence to be effective. To their credit, the board agreed to all my terms. The announcement went out company-wide the following day. Blackwell Enterprises is pleased to announce the appointment of Olivia Chen as Vice President of Talent Strategy and Client Excellence, a new role focused on aligning our talent development practices with our commitment to client success. Olivia will report directly to CEO Bradley Marshall and will join the executive leadership team effective immediately. The reactions were varied and revealing. Amanda and others who had shared their stories with me sent congratulatory messages filled with cautious hope. Most middle managers expressed polite support, though some seemed wary of what my elevation might mean for established practices. The executive team, with a few exceptions like Diane, maintained a professional cordiality that barely masked their uncertainty about this disruption to their ranks. And Greg? He made his decision the day after my appointment was announced. Rather than adapt to the new reality, he resigned, accepting a position with a smaller competitor. His departure email made no mention of me or the circumstances leading to the organizational changes, just a bland statement about pursuing new opportunities after his successful tenure. 6 months after my promotion to executive client partner, I found myself in a position I could never have imagined when Greg had dismissed me as not executive material. The Titan implementation was proceeding flawlessly, exceeding every milestone and performance metric. My team, carefully selected based on skill rather than politics, had earned Titan's complete trust. Sandra regularly cited our partnership as the gold standard for vendor relationships in her industry presentations. But the most significant changes were happening within Blackwell itself. The transparent promotion criteria I had implemented with Diane's support were beginning to shift the culture. High performers who had been previously overlooked were now advancing based on measurable achievements rather than subjective, executive qualities. Amanda had recently been promoted to Director of Enterprise Solutions after her team delivered exceptional results for 3 consecutive quarters. Miguel from Technical Sales was now leading our innovation lab, his creative approach finally receiving the recognition it deserved. Not everyone embraced these changes, of course. Martin maintained a cold professionalism in our interactions, but his resistance was evident in subtle ways. Resources that were mysteriously unavailable, meetings scheduled at conflicting times, information that reached me only after persistent follow-up. He represented the old guard, those who had benefited from the previous system and viewed merit-based advancement as a threat rather than an improvement. I was reviewing the latest Titan implementation metrics when my assistant interrupted with an unusual message. Bradley wanted to see me immediately in the boardroom. No agenda, no explanation, just an urgent request for my presence. Walking toward the executive floor, I felt a flicker of concern. Had something gone wrong with Titan? Had Martin finally convinced Bradley that my approach was too disruptive? The uncertainty reminded me of that day months ago when Greg had called me into his office to steal my account, but I quickly dismissed the comparison. I had proven myself many times over since then. When I entered the boardroom, I was surprised to find not just Bradley, but the entire executive leadership team, along with Patricia Alvarez and Richard Takahashi from the board. Their expressions were unreadable, a carefully maintained neutrality that immediately put me on alert. "Olivia, thank you for joining us," Bradley began, his tone formal. "Please, have a seat." I took the only available chair, directly across from Bradley. "Is everything all right? Has something happened with Titan?" "Titan is more than satisfied," Bradley assured me. "In fact, their feedback is part of why we're here today." He exchanged glances with Patricia, who gave him a slight nod. "We've been conducting a comprehensive review of our client relationship, management and talent development practices over the past several months." Martin shifted uncomfortably in his seat. This was the first I'd heard of such a review, which was odd given my role overseeing talent strategy. "The findings have been illuminating," Bradley continued, "particularly when comparing client outcomes and retention metrics between different approaches within our organization." Patricia leaned forward. "Olivia, the initiatives you've implemented with Titan and the other accounts under your purview have delivered exceptional results. Client satisfaction is up 42%, revenue has increased by 28%, and team member retention has improved dramatically." Richard added, "When we compare these outcomes to our traditional approach, the difference is stark. Your data-driven, merit-based methodology has proven superior by every objective measure." I nodded, appreciating the validation, but still uncertain why this required an emergency meeting with the full executive team. "Which brings us to the purpose of this gathering," Bradley said, his expression finally warming. "The board has unanimously approved a fundamental restructuring of our client and talent management approach. Effective immediately, your methodology will become the standard across the entire organization." This was significant, far beyond what I had anticipated. That's substantial. Implementation across all divisions will require careful coordination. "Precisely why you'll be leading it," Patricia stated. "We're creating a new position, Chief Talent and Client Strategy Officer, reporting directly to Bradley. The role will oversee the integration of your approach throughout Blackwell, with authority to implement the necessary structural and cultural changes." I sat back, processing the magnitude of this shift. And you're offering me this position? Not offering, Bradley corrected with a smile. Appointing. The board's decision is final. Your results have spoken for themselves, Olivia. I glanced around the table, noting the varied reactions. Diane looked genuinely pleased. Several others seemed cautiously supportive. And Martin's face was a rigid mask, his knuckles white where he gripped his pen. What about the existing structure? I asked, the practical implications coming into focus. Where does this new role fit with current leadership? Bradley's expression became more measured. That's the second part of today's announcement. We're consolidating several functions under your new role, including areas previously managed separately. He turned slightly toward Martin. This will necessitate some changes in reporting structures and responsibilities. The subtext was clear. Martin would be losing significant authority. The old guard was being replaced by the new approach I represented. No wonder he looked like he might snap his pen in half. I understand this is a significant change, Patricia added, addressing the entire room. But the market is shifting rapidly, and Blackwell must evolve to remain competitive. The data supporting this decision is unambiguous. I maintained my professional composure, but inside, a wave of vindication washed over me. This wasn't just a promotion. It was institutional endorsement of everything I had been fighting for since that confrontation with Greg. It was validation on the grandest scale possible. When does this transition take effect? I asked. Immediately, Bradley replied. We'll announce it company-wide this afternoon. You'll have the authority to select your leadership team and define implementation priorities starting today. After the meeting dispersed, Diane lingered behind. Congratulations, she said warmly. Though I told you so might be more appropriate. I smiled. I couldn't have navigated this without your guidance, Diane. Perhaps, she acknowledged. But the vision and execution were entirely yours. You saw problems others ignored and created solutions others couldn't imagine. She glanced toward the door where Martin had exited. Not everyone will embrace this change, of course. I'm prepared for resistance, I assured her. Change is never painless, especially when it disrupts established power structures. Speaking of which, Diane lowered her voice slightly. There's something Bradley didn't mention in the meeting. The board's succession planning committee has begun formal discussions about Bradley's eventual replacement. Your name is prominent in those conversations. This was even more surprising than the promotion. That seems premature. I've barely established myself at the executive level. Results speak louder than tenure, Diane replied simply. Bradley is approaching retirement age within the next few years. The board is thinking ahead, and they're impressed with your transformation of our approach. Just something to keep in mind as you implement these changes. The implications were staggering, from being told I wasn't executive material to being considered for the CEO position, all within the span of less than a year. The trajectory was unprecedented, but then again, so were the results I had delivered. The company-wide announcement went out that afternoon. My inbox immediately flooded with congratulatory messages from colleagues throughout the organization. Amanda's stood out with its simple eloquence. From not executive material to C-suite in 6 months. Thank you for showing us all what's possible when excellence refuses to be denied. Over the next few weeks, I methodically implemented the new integrated approach across Blackwell's divisions. I selected leaders based on demonstrated ability rather than seniority or connections. I established clear, objective performance metrics that would determine advancement opportunities. I created cross-functional teams focused on client outcomes, rather than departmental targets. The resistance came, as expected, primarily from those who had thrived under the old system. Martin submitted his resignation 3 weeks after my appointment, accepting a position with a smaller competitor. Several of his closest allies followed, unable or unwilling to adapt to the merit-based culture that was taking root. But the results spoke for themselves. Client satisfaction improved dramatically as teams focused on actual business outcomes rather than internal metrics. Employee engagement surged as people saw genuine opportunity based on contribution rather than conformity. Revenue growth accelerated as our reputation for exceptional client service spread throughout the industry. 4 months into my new role, I received an unexpected email. The sender was Greg Peterson, my former boss whose dismissive assessment had inadvertently launched my meteoric rise. The subject line read simply, "A belated acknowledgement." I hesitated before opening it, unsure what to expect after months of silence. The message was brief but striking. Olivia, I've been following Blackwell's transformation from a distance. The market is attributing much of this success to the innovative approach you've implemented. While our professional relationship ended poorly, I can recognize when my judgment was mistaken. You've proven to be exactly the kind of executive leader Blackwell needed. Perhaps I was the one who wasn't company material after all. Regards, Greg. I read the message twice, absorbing the rare admission of error. There was a time when such validation from Greg would have meant everything to me, when his approval had seemed necessary for my advancement. Now it was merely an interesting footnote in a journey that had far exceeded anything he could have imagined for me. After brief consideration, I composed a simple reply. Greg, thank you for your note. Life often takes unexpected turns. I hope you're finding fulfillment in your current endeavors. Regards, Olivia. Professional, neither gloating nor bitter. There was no need for either. Success was its own vindication. The following week, Bradley called me into his office for our regular strategy session. Instead of our usual agenda, he had a different conversation in mind. The board has formalized its succession timeline, he began without preamble. I'll be retiring as CEO in 18 months. They've requested that you and I begin structured transition planning immediately. Though Diane had hinted at this possibility, the concrete timeline was still surprising. That's an accelerated schedule, I observed. Are you comfortable with that timeline? Bradley smiled. More than comfortable. The company is evolving in ways that require different leadership than what got us here. Your vision for integrated talent and client strategy represents Blackwell's future. The board recognizes that, and frankly, so do I. I took a moment to absorb the magnitude of this development. I appreciate the confidence. There's still much to accomplish before any transition. Certainly, he agreed, which is why we're establishing this timeline now. It gives us 18 months to complete the transformation you've begun, demonstrate sustained results, and prepare the organization for leadership continuity. As I left Bradley's office, I paused in the hallway, struck by the symmetry of the journey. Almost exactly a year earlier, I had stood in Greg's office as he informed me that I wasn't executive material, that I should be grateful just to have a job at Blackwell. Now I was preparing to become its chief executive officer, implementing changes that were transforming not just the company's performance, but its fundamental culture. The most significant aspect wasn't my personal vindication, satisfying though that was. It was the ripple effect throughout the organization. The other overlooked high performers now advancing based on merit, the diverse perspectives now included. In strategic decisions, the genuine meritocracy taking root where artificial limitations had previously flourished. That evening, as I was preparing to leave for the day, Amanda stopped by my office. Got a minute? She asked, lingering in the doorway. Of course, I replied, gesturing to the chairs opposite my desk. She settled in, studying me with a thoughtful expression. I just had my quarterly review with the new evaluation process you implemented. First time in 4 years I've received feedback based entirely on actual results rather than nebulous development areas that somehow never seemed to improve no matter what I accomplished. I smiled. That's exactly how it should work. Objective criteria, consistently applied. It's revolutionary, she said simply. And not just for me. The entire team feels it. This sense that what you do actually matters more than who you know or whether you fit some arbitrary executive image. That's the goal, I acknowledged. Excellence comes in many forms. Our job is to recognize and reward it consistently, not just when it matches our preconceptions. Amanda nodded. Word is that you're being groomed for CEO. The transformation will be complete. Nothing's certain until it happens, I cautioned. 18 months is a long time in business. Maybe, she conceded. But you've already won the fundamental battle. Even if something unexpected happened tomorrow, you've changed how this company identifies and develops talent. That can't be undone. She was right. The systems and processes I had implemented were becoming embedded in Blackwell's culture. The objective promotion criteria, the transparent evaluation mechanisms, the focus on actual contribution rather than superficial qualities. These changes would outlast any individual, including me. As Amanda left, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past year. Greg's dismissive words, "You're just not executive material," had been meant to limit my potential, to keep me in what he perceived as my proper place. Instead, they had become the catalyst for a transformation that extended far beyond my individual career. Sometimes the most effective response to those who would diminish your value isn't argument or resentment. It's excellence so undeniable that it fundamentally changes the standard by which value is measured. Greg had judged me by a flawed metric designed to maintain the status quo. My achievement wasn't just proving him wrong, it was creating a better system of evaluation for everyone. In the end, the sweetest revenge wasn't becoming CEO or even outranking those who had dismissed my potential. It was transforming the very definition of what constituted executive material at Blackwell Enterprises, ensuring that talent and contribution would always matter more than conformity to outdated stereotypes. As I gathered my things to leave, I glanced at the small jade plant on my credenza, a descendant of the one that had sat on my desk during those years of being overlooked and undervalued. It had flourished and grown, just as I had. But unlike me, it had never needed anyone else's validation to recognize its true nature and potential. That, perhaps, was the most important lesson of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.